welcome to Still Speak Podcast. This is not going to be an update video on the Gabby Petito case. If you've been following my updates, yesterday I did not do one. Why? Well, unfortunately, Brian Laundrie is still, quote-unquote, missing. He has not been found. So there wasn't really anything that happened to report on. I uploaded a video yesterday morning, but that was for Friday's update. So last night I was like, I don't even know what to make a video about because there's nothing. You know, I wish I could come to you and say, guess what? He's been captured. And he's alive to face the consequences if, of course, he's guilty of this crime. But there was nothing. The only big thing that really happened yesterday was that Dog, the bounty hunter, banged on the Laundrie's door. And that was it. That was the biggest thing of the day. And I wanted to make this video because I want to talk about the why. And you're probably wondering what I mean by that. Well, I mean the why. That so many people are asking and complaining about and moaning about. Why did Gabby's story blow up? Why did it get so much attention? Why did her parents get on every single news outlet out there? Why is people still covering this if we know what happened? Let's talk about it. We humans, and I can probably include myself in this because I'm sure I'm guilty of it, like to point fingers and we like to blame things, right? We want to blame somebody for something. It feels like that's always the case, right? And I'm seeing a lot of talk about this is a race thing, this is a male versus female thing, males don't get as much attention when they go missing, this is a money thing, her parents clearly had money to get help because they got a lawyer. I'm seeing all these like broad statements and assumptions and finger pointing, and some of the posts are like, why is this story so big and there's thousands of people? Just the way they're written, it comes across very bitter. It comes across very dismissive of Gabby's story. And we're going to get to that. But I kind of want to go over, in my opinion, why I think certain stories blow up. Why? And I think it boils down to, again, in my opinion, uniqueness. How unique the story is, or complex, or a mystery, right? You look at, Casey Anthony, for example. Who doesn't know who Casey Anthony is? What made that story unique? You had a mother who didn't report her daughter missing for a month, for starters. That was like the first, what? Because anybody who's a parent is going, who doesn't report their child for a month and say, she's missing? The answer is nobody, okay? And then you had pictures of her out partying during this time that she alleges her daughter had been missing. She claimed she had been looking for her on her own, and yet there she is in, what t-shirt contest or whatever it was. And then, of course, Kaylee was this young, beautiful little girl, and it was just unique. It wasn't like the other stories. It was different. And you had the whole Zanny the nanny aspect of that case, and you add all that together, and this is why it had so much attention, and the majority of people knew this woman was most likely guilty, and yet they still clung to this story. And you look at Scott Peterson, like, why did Scott Peterson get so big? Well, Lacey was 8 months pregnant. It wasn't that she was 12 weeks pregnant. It wasn't even that she was 20 weeks pregnant. She was like due any moment. And it was Christmas time. And then the affair came out. And again, you take all those aspects and it made the story unique. You look at O.J. Simpson, like I said in another video, that's pretty self-explanatory, right? Why did O.J. Simpson get so big? I mean, because it's O.J. Simpson, right? and the Bronco and how they were killed and how brutally and awful it was how they were killed, and the glove. And so again, it was unique. You look at John Benet Ramsey. Look at that story. It was also around Christmas, right? She was killed in her own home. And there was this whole pageant aspect to it, right? And I said all this in another video, but I want to say it again because of what I'm going to talk about next. So I think it's not a simple answer. I think that maybe in some instances it may be race. In some instances, it may be because the person's attractive. In other instances, it may be because the people involved in the story are well-to-do. I don't think that's the case for all the stories and why they don't get attention. I just think that there's another element here that could be just they're unique. It's what grabs people's attention. And in the case of Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie, you have this young couple, right? And they leave together in a van. And they set out on this amazing cross-country trip in this van. And only one of the two return. And that person lawyered up. The van itself is unique because it wasn't a couple doing cross-country trip, stopping at hotels and lodges, or even doing it in a large camper. They were in a van, sometimes a tent outside of the van. Then you add in that they didn't meet up with anybody or go on this trip with other people, and it was just them in this van, sleeping and traveling and isolated to one another. And then you add in the element that Brian did return, which is rather ballsy, if you ask me, to say the least, right? And in her van, it was a mystery, right? Instantly, because at that time there were so many different things that could explain where she was, or explain what could have happened. And it also, at one point in the beginning, there was also this lingering possibility that this was all some big misunderstanding, and maybe it's just a simple explanation, and it's not what we think it is, right? It was a mystery. It definitely was a mystery. And with the amount of states that this couple had traveled together, and the amount of states that he had to drive through to get back to Florida, it seemed almost impossible that this girl was going to be tracked down to wherever she was. And people love that mystery. They do. And these stories are tragic, and we shouldn't love that they're a mystery. But what I'm saying is they like that feeling of what's going on here, what's happening, where is she, and what have you. That's why people like suspense movies and suspense books. They want to know what's going to happen next. How's this going to turn out? What's the ending going to be like? And this story, although a real one, has had a ton of ups and downs and back and forths. And, so when this first was unfolding initially, there was so much happening at one time. Like, I would refresh my feed on any one of the social media platforms, and new information was there. It was so rapid, I could barely keep up. I was making notes all day long. It was non-stop, right? And one of the biggest turn of events was the one person that Gabby was with. That one person knew where she was left, and only that person knew what happened to her. And that person lawyered up. He had the war of words via his lawyer with her family, publicly, and then he took off, fled, vanished, disappeared. Poof! Just, he's gone. And these statements released by the lawyers for both families in a public forum made people connect to her family. Because we saw the heartbreak, we saw the desperation, we saw the agony and the frustration, and the other family absolutely refused to help them in any way. We watched it. We saw it happening. They even, by not wanting to speak with them or help them in any way, were denying her family any sort of hope that she may be alive out there. They denied them of that. And so many parents want to have that hope. They want to have that hope for as long as possible that there's this possibility that their loved one is okay. And this family was not giving them any sort of hope, let alone answers. And while similar may happen in many other cases, we witness it happening. Like I said, I don't know a single person who could hear or read the statements that the Petito Schmidt lawyer released of them begging and pleading for him or his family to help them without feeling completely crushed. Even males. Like I said the other day, this is the first case that I've actually seen so many males discussing it. That's not usually the case. Usually all the groups are just like straight up female. You might have like one dude, and everybody likes him because you're like, oh, you're the one dude that actually wants to talk about this case. So there's been a lot of males, okay? Because you're witnessing this heartbreak. It's unfolding in front of our eyes. And when we watch this, I think the public felt this sense of, well, if his family's not going to help them, we are. We're going to find clues and hints and evidence, and we're going to show up to their house, and we're going to chant outside their house. We're going to apply pressure to them. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And they felt this human need to help Gabby's family because they weren't getting it from the people they needed it from. And this sparked anger because that other family should have been helping, but they weren't. And the public became angry. And then the story split into two stories when Brian took off. And one side of the country, you had officials looking for one, that being Brian. And on the other side, you had officials looking for the other, who would be Gabby. And the only thing anybody knew at the time for sure where it was, the only thing that everybody knew for sure the location of, was the van. Was the freaking van. Okay? And I gotta say, if a van could talk verbally, wouldn't that be amazing, like Lightning McQueen, right? They'd have a whole story to tell, that van. And it would have been solved on day 2. And it wasn't. Although the story resolved rather quickly as far as finding Gabby, a lot quicker than I was even expecting. And the thing is that van became a big part of the story. And the fact that it was her van, it spoke for her, just not verbally. And this is a reminder of why I call this channel Still Speak, and I explained it in another video, that victims do still speak to us. You just need to look at the story and the evidence. And so, like I said, the van, in a sense, became Gabby's voice. People connected it to Gabby. It was almost like it was a part of her and who she was. It was something that people could track. People can check Google Earth to see if they see her, or, trail cams in national parks, or their own footage, and, if they were in that same area at the same time. The van helped locate Gabby in what seemed to be looking for an ant in thousands and thousands of miles of land. She could have been anywhere. Literally anywhere. So thank goodness the story did blow up the way it did. And there were people out there who saw the story, who had seen the van. And they didn't just see the van, they had it on video footage. And Gabby was found just a few feet away. Not feet, excuse me, minutes. A few minutes walk away. I think it was 3 or 4 minutes walking. It's not long at all. From where that van was last seen on footage to where her body was. That's amazing. Like, can we just all agree on that? Like, that's so amazing, right? What if nobody had ever seen them out there? How long would it have been to track down her last location and find her? We'll never know, because thank goodness she was found. And it only took a day and a half of actual searches for her, and only took about a week and a day after she was reported missing. That's incredible. That's rapid, fast. And unfortunately, a lot of families don't get their cases solved that quickly. Now, this isn't fully solved yet. The person of interest is still on the run or dead. We don't know. But Gabby was young, and she was just starting out in her life, and she had so much more to live of it. And she had such a social media presence. And I hate bringing up this case, but it reminds me of the Watts case. And there's reasons why I hate bringing up that case. But Shanann Watts, she also had a heavy social media presence. And, a lot of people try so hard to present perfection or what seems to be a dream life. I mean, look at Gabby's photos. The places they visited were breathtaking. Beautiful. And I'm older than Gabby, and I've never taken a trip like that, and I may never have the chance to take a trip like that. Thing is that it doesn't actually matter how beautiful the scenery is or was. It wasn't matching what was actually happening in her life. And I think of it this way. For those of you who have kids, you know what I mean by this. It's like when you're trying to take a picture of all your kids looking at you at the same time and smiling, and you take 20 pictures before you get the right one, right? But I don't share the 19 pictures prior to that one. I only show you the one. When reality is in those 19 photos I didn't show you. And I think it's rather clear that something more was going on with this couple who on the surface looked like just madly, deeply in love, living this peaceful life full of salads and yoga and picnics and hiking and hammocks and ukulele and sleeping in a tent, right? There was obviously more to this story. The public wants to understand. They want to know how it can all go wrong, or if it was wrong all along. And I think the answer is in the body cam footage during their domestic altercation that was released, because it showed the couple's raw selves, the stuff they were hiding, the stuff that was edited out of videos and pictures. I just want to know how long and how was it bad. At least I do, anyways. And we know that Gabby only lived for roughly another 15 to 18 days after that. And she never made the trek back home, and she never got to see her family again. But to my social media point, most of us know or should know that social media is only what we want to show people, right? It's not a representation of our actual lives that we live. And this story is yet another in many stories that proves that. And as a matter of fact, when I see somebody or a couple or a family, whatever, and the profile appears to be perfect, the most beautiful pictures, always in the best of outfits, house is always immaculate. They're doing this and they're doing that. And my immediate thought is, I wonder what the reality is. I wonder how their marriage really is beyond this picture. Nobody's perfect, and nobody has a perfect life. Even if you're a billionaire, it does not mean that you have the perfect life. Many actually suffer who have all the money in the world. But in the Watts case, which was not as publicly followed as Gabby's story is, mostly only the true crime community got sucked into that story and stuck with it through the ups and downs until there was nothing left to even discuss, and hadn't been discussed a million times over, and people just finally moved on. And I would say initially there was a ton of people who heard about the Watts case, but as soon as Chris Watts was arrested, people moved on, right? They were like, there's no mystery here. In their minds, it was this dude, he had an affair, and he killed his family. Case closed. Next. And for those who did follow along, they got intrigued by Shanann's presence on social media to find out more. And they wanted to understand how this perfect family, seemingly perfect family, could end in such a horrific, tragic way. And without getting too much into the Watts case, because I hate discussing this case at this point, the image that Shanann Watts put on social media was not really how her life was. There was actually a ton of issues in that marriage. And most of it got swept under the rug for years and years and years. And there's nothing good comes from that. Like pretending or not addressing anything and just sweeping it under the rug because there's a buildup, right? Because you're not addressing it. And in that marriage, it wasn't one-sided at all. And I'm seeing a lot of people using Gabby's case and the Watts case to say, hey, be aware of abuse. And if you follow the Watts case beyond the headlines, you would know and see that there was actually no form of abuse from Chris to Shanann prior to the terrible, tragic day when her unborn son, Bella, and Celeste were killed tragically on August 13, 2018. And I'm sorry, I know that makes people mad when I say that. I do. And they argue with me and they'll say, well, she was killed, so obviously they were a domestic. Yes, in the very, very end, that event, there was abuse, obviously, right? Because she was murdered. But prior to that, there was none. And when you just go off the headlines about a story, or you watch what Netflix, wants to present you, which is, in that particular story, was a very skewed view of the story, it's really no different than Shanann presenting a perfect life that didn't exist, because now you have documentaries presenting this life that actually didn't exist between the two. Okay? The real story of that family can actually help people, but nobody wants to talk about it, or they want to present it in a different way, right? And it's a shame. It really is a shame, because we often learn from tragedies. And one of my biggest goals with this channel, and I said it in one of my first videos, was that taking these stories, there's no point in just discussing the stories, right? I could sit here and we could just talk about the stories, but what are we doing? We're just talking about the stories? I want to do something with these stories, and I want to point out different ways of looking at things, and consider different possibilities, and help people to not be so quick to hang somebody. I want to learn, what can we learn from these stories? As far as missing people, I want to help people who have somebody who's missing, I want that. I don't want to just sit here and we just spew our nonsense for 4 or 5 hours like so many other channels do, and that's great. Some days I even want to do that, and I just go sit and listen to somebody for 4 hours, right? But I don't want to do that here. If I'm going to take my time to do this, I want to learn from it, or help somebody else learn from it, or help somebody else. So when I look at this, like, these documentaries that kind of just give you this glossy, picture-perfect view of a story, and they don't include the rest of the stuff that was happening and going on, it's no help to anybody. It's not. And, Shanann's presence on social media was different because she was selling a product for an MLM company called Thrive. And so she had a reason to pretend like she always had energy, and she was always doing this and doing that with her kids, and always with her husband. Her husband was amazing, and he was supportive, and he was this and he was that, and because she was trying to sell the image and sell the story to people, like, come on and thrive with me, and you can have this amazing life because you have so much energy and time and this and that, right? And Gabby was presenting a different life because she wanted to share her passion of traveling with people. And you know what? I'm really grateful for her, because now that I know about the story and I saw her pictures, my God, some of those pictures were absolutely amazing. I've never even seen those pictures before. I'm sure I could find them on Google, but I would have never taken the time to do that. But now I took the time to look into her story, and I was able to actually look at those gorgeous pictures. They're amazing. And she probably was doing it because she also wanted to turn it into something that would make money, right? I don't know what her end game was, and we'll never know now. We know how her dream ended, though. It ended when her life was taken. And that's really freaking tragic. Okay? It's just tragic. And because of her age, because she wasn't married yet, she didn't have children yet, if she even wanted to have children, and she was living this life that I think so many of us would love to have done. Whether or not she can afford it doesn't even matter. It just makes the story that more tragic. Because it should have been one of the best trips of her life. And it wasn't. And so now we have this deceased young girl who was not only killed by somebody, most likely somebody that she loved, most likely by somebody that she knew had issues but would never, ever kill her. She probably never considered that. That probably never crossed her mind. But her body was left behind for weeks in a national park, which is awful, right? Because the glowing pictures of herself in all these different national parks, and there she is laying dead in the middle of a national park. And you can look at this and you can say, well, at least she died in a place she loved, right? Or that it was so great she got to see so much in her last few months on Earth. But back home in Long Island and in Florida, her family carried on with life, thinking that their daughter, their sister, their niece was off living and enjoying the most amazing places that this country has to offer, with somebody they thought Gabby loved very much, never knowing that she was not even with them anymore on Earth. Think about that. Gabby most likely died between August 27th and August 30th. Her body was recovered on September 19th. Her mother reported her missing on September 11th. So the family, that last text was on August 30th. So you got 31st, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9. 10 days. 11 days. And all that time, They had no freaking idea that she was already gone. And then you have this other young guy, right? Who had his whole life ahead of him too. Who had no regard for another human being. And returns without his girlfriend, fiance, whatever. And refused to help her family. And then took off, taking all the answers with him. And who may have taken those answers with him in his own death. We don't know yet. Evidence only paints so much of a picture. And Brian alone is the only one who knows exactly what happened. So when you're sitting here and you're going, why are they looking for Brian? Why are they looking for Brian? Well, they're looking for Brian because everybody's invested in what happened to Gabby. Where did this go wrong? For how long was this, going wrong? What led to this? What was said? Now, you can argue with me and you could say, well, he might not tell the full truth. He may not, or he may, right? If they get him, if he's been out in the swamp for forever and they get him in, they give him some food and some shelter, he might cave and just start spilling his guts. We'll never actually know, Gabby's side of the story. But the only person left on this earth, right, to tell any sort of story is him. And believe me, police want to know. That's why they're busting their butts trying to find him. And we know how Gabby's story began, but we don't know how it ended. And we can sit here and we can say that she got attention because she's young and attractive and she's a blonde-headed girl and she's white and that her parents had means to get help. Or we can consider that she got attention because the story is unique. And people attach themselves to the story for different reasons. Some people connected to Gabby as a parent. They looked to her as what if it was my daughter? As a grandparent, they looked at her like, well, what if it was my grandchild? For the people who were the same age as her, they felt a connection towards her. And while she was deceased, she was alive in the minds of so many people because she was alive in her photos and videos and stories on Instagram. And none of us were watching her adventures in real time, except her friends and family. It was only after those events unfolded. And as you watch, and you're watching this journey, right, after the fact, of course, and you're getting through this whole journey, and you're watching it go forth through the social media posts, and you get to the end, you're going to want to know the ending. And we find out that she's dead. And now, because you've already invested in that story, now you want justice for her and her family. And right now, justice feels really far away, right? Because let me tell you, every day that the story is slowing down, every day that the police end a search and they haven't announced anything, whether finding him or finding some major clue, I'm feeling a little bummed out. I am. I'm like, all right, this is getting ridiculous now, right? Because the dude's been missing for almost 2 weeks. It'll be 2 weeks on Tuesday. And, he had that 4-day head start. And he had 2 days of searches. And then there was 1 day of a break. And then there was 6 days of sunup to sundown searches. And there's still no sign of Brian Laundrie. And right now, my concern is that I'm not totally sold he killed himself. Okay? And I think I said this in another video. I'm just going to say it again. 2 things. I think, okay, well, he could have killed himself out in the national park after, if he killed her, he could have just killed himself out there, right? Get your hammock, hang yourself from a tree. He had that hammock, that portable hammock. He had 35 to 36 hour drive where he can consider killing himself and stopping and doing just that. Even gone and buy a gun and done it. If he didn't have one already, we don't even know. We don't even know if they were traveling with a knife. I assume they were because they were cooking in the van, right? So I mean, there's ways that he could have done that. And even if he didn't do it then he comes home. And he's there for, almost 11 days without anybody even knowing that he's there. He could have killed himself in any amount of those times right there in those 11-day period of time. And then once everybody did know, he could have killed himself right there in the house. There was no reason to go somewhere and kill himself unless he was going to go jump off a bridge or something, which I don't think there's any major bridge in the Carlton Reserve. But anyway, I don't know if he's alive. I don't get the sense that he's dead. But every time a search ends, I think to myself, you know what? Maybe he really is dead. And that's just going to really suck. And I'm going to feel really bad for her family because that's it. This couple goes on this trip, and at the end of it is they're both dead. And nobody knows what the hell happened. That's not what I hope for her family or her. And Gabby's family was huge advocates. From the start, her mother and stepfather went in front of a camera and they exposed themselves. They made themselves vulnerable, showing all their raw emotions that they were feeling, like confusion and frustration and concern. It was heartbreaking. And I actually do wonder who set up that first interview where the mom and the stepdad are sitting and they're in front of the camera and mom's holding a picture of her daughter. I'd love to know who set that up because it was probably the best thing they ever did because it was the catalyst. People saw that mother in such pain and heard that story and saw Gabby's face and they wanted to know more. And then you had Gabby's father and the stepmother and the four parents, okay, did so many interviews that I lost count. And they all united together because they all loved her and they wanted to find her. And they asked us, the public, find Gabby. Don't even focus on Brian and his BS. We need to find her. And people did just that. And as a result, she was found. The media is the media. They cover only certain topics, but a variety of topics, okay? And they only have so much time to do such. And it's impossible, to report on every single murdered and missing person. They would literally need 24 hours streaming live 7 days a week with anchors and hosts and all that jazz. And even then, it would never cover adequately every single case of somebody who has been is missing or murdered to give each story the justice and time that they deserve. It wouldn't even be enough time. Do you know how many people go missing a day? Do you know how many people go missing a week? The great news is that the great majority, I think it's 75% or something like that, get resolved. Whether it's they ran away or there was a misunderstanding or a miscommunication or something to that effect, they're found. But so many people go missing. It's insane. They just don't have the time for that. And listen, to be completely transparent here, I hate the media. I hate the media. So, in all honesty, I would love to blame them for why they don't, only certain stories get covered on the news. I would love to do that. But I can't put fault fully on them. And that's coming from somebody who hates the media. So, okay? And I'm sort of tired of people complaining that some stories blow up and others don't. Now complaining is one thing, but when you're complaining without providing any sort of solution, like what do you think needs to change, or what do you think we could do to fix that? Or you just want to complain? You just want to complain? Okay. Well, if you just want to complain, then go for it. But do you want to complain and actually do something about it? That's a different story. It's so easy to sit around and complain and point fingers and bitch and moan, right? It's a whole other thing to actually take action and actively do something to try to change that. And I'm glad because some people are starting to put other stories out there in honor of Gabby's story, that they weren't doing that before. But unfortunately, the public has a short attention span. And while right now people are like, oh, we have to shed light on other stories too, and they start sharing all these other stories, eventually they'll stop doing that. They will. And they'll move on to something else. It happens with every topic. And as quick as Gabby's story got big, watch how quick it goes away. Especially if Brian ends up being found dead, and if there's no finding him for months on end. People will eventually just move on. They will. And I really don't want to go here and bring up a huge discussion about George Floyd. But we all know that name, right? At least I hope so. And I think his story is actually a really good example of what I'm trying to say in this entire video. Why did George Floyd get so much attention when other people of all races are killed by officers during stops? I don't know the answer to that, by the way. I don't. But I think part of it was because we watched his death, right? We all saw that footage, right? Okay. And, somebody filmed it and they uploaded it not long after it happened. It was within minutes, and we saw that. And we're all human, right? None of us want to watch somebody slowly die in front of our eyeballs. It was really hard to watch. And we didn't see Gabby get killed, right? But we saw the events of what was happening unfold that was leading up to her death, and then it abruptly ended. Right? Why did everybody riot and protest in Floyd's name, but not for the hundreds of other people who had been killed during police interaction over the years? And final question is, where did all that anger go? Where did it all go? The riots eventually stopped, and I think a lot of people were grateful for that, just because they had to live in certain areas that the riots took place, and that was rough for a lot of people. But so did the protest, which I love protests. Protest on, baby. So did the discussion. It just went away. It seemed that everybody just one day woke up and decided, you know what, we're gonna move on. Like, we're done with this topic. We're going to move on. Because we humans have a short attention span. We were hearing about his case all day. If you turn on the news, that's all you heard about. All day, every day. George Floyd, George Floyd, George Floyd. For months. Because the riots went on for, I think it was 6 weeks or something. For months, right? And then, as quickly as it began, it quickly ended. Because we don't have long attention spans. So, we can sit here and say, well, Gabby's case blew up, blah, blah. Trust me, like I said, it's going to go away soon. Watch. Mark my word. And we all need to live our lives, right? We can't be out there protesting every single day of about every story, every minute of every day. We have to go to work, take care of our kids. Nobody has time for that, right? And the same thing with these true crime cases. Like, there's only so much time we can dedicate before, like, our laundry piles up. And we're like, I've been following this case for a week now, but I have, like, 6 loads of laundry I need to do. And I'm just so distracted by it. So then people start to lose that interest, and then they just move on. And on the topic of George, why are so many complaining that Gabby got so much attention because she's white? And saying, well, the media only shows white people's stories. When just a year ago, we heard nonstop on the news for months about George Floyd and the race issues in our country. They had no problem, covering his story at all. And so this argument that people are trying to say is like, the media isn't covering it because of her, because of race, like the media is only covering this story because she's white, basically, is where I'm going with this. That argument kind of falls flat for me. And trust me, I really hate to defend the media. I really hate it, guys. But it does. It kind of falls flat for me because I'm going, how could you say that's what's happening when we literally just watched them talk about George Floyd for months on end? He's not white. He was in the news. Listen, we don't need mainstream media. We have social media. And social media has its own problems, but some good comes from social media. A lot of good happens. And we, the public, are bigger, louder, and more powerful than any media station with sponsors. This channel alone has 4 different types of social media accounts besides the YouTube account, which YouTube has 2 billion users. I have an account for this podcast on Facebook, which has 2.8 billion active users. I have one on Instagram for this channel. They have 1 billion users. Twitter has 206 million. And I have a TikTok, which on TikTok there's 65 million users. And that's only 4 out of hundreds that exist. And I made those accounts so that we can share missing persons information quickly, and we can share them on all platforms so that we can ensure that it reaches as many people as possible as quickly as possible. And besides social media, which obviously gets the public involved, then of course you need the police because they're the ones with access to information or who have the resources necessary to help that nobody in the public has or can do for you. Spread the word that if someone goes missing or is murdered and they need help with getting justice because nobody's been arrested or held accountable, tell people. Tell them, make a post. Make it public. Put it out there. Contact every outlet you can find. Put it on every platform you can find. Join groups on social media that pertain or relate to the people who are missing or who were murdered. For example, I saw a lot of people with Gabby's case posting her story in van life type groups, cross-country trip type groups, Grand Teton and Yosemite planning type groups. That's brilliant, right? Because that's the same topic that Gabby was into and what was happening. And so if you go into those groups and you share her story, you have people looking out and checking their footages and all that other stuff. And you can actually use YouTube to connect and get that story out as much as possible. Because the thing is that many people have canceled their cable and are only using streaming services, and others have lost all trust in the media, myself being one of them, who doesn't turn on the TV. As a matter of fact, I don't have cable. I haven't had cable since my first child was born, 11 years ago. And even if I had cable, I'm not watching the news. So even if the news was covering a story, I still wouldn't see it because I'm not watching the news. And I know I'm not alone on that. And instead of trying to dismiss Gabby's story or get upset or feel some type of bitterness that she got so much of attention, we can actually flip this around, okay? Let's actually look at the good that's come from Gabby's story, okay? I'm going to list off some things. 1, Kylan Schulte and Crystal Turner's story got a ton more attention than it had, which may lead to someone being arrested. And people know the story now, and people feel connected to these 2 women, and they want to help her family. People are donating to the GoFundMes and things of the sort. Number 2, it brought attention and awareness about abuse. It opened the dialogue about the signs, which can help people to learn what to spot, or it may help others in abusive situations to get out of their own abusive relationships, because you're not alone. Number 3, people will be much more aware now when they visit a national park, right? They may purchase specific cameras before they go, and and videotape everything and make mental notes and written notes of things that they see. Even if it just slightly seems suspicious, they're going to jot that down because Gabby's story is going to be in the back of their mind. Right? They'll go to a national park and they'll think, oh God, Gabby Petito, remember that? Oh my gosh. It shed light on hundreds of indigenous women who went missing from the same area, who's getting a whole new spotlight now because of it. It shed light on how many people go missing, die, or end up killed in national parks. And this will spark people to be more cautious, to stay more connected to their families when they're on these types of trips. They'll make sure to leave good, decent trails of how to look for them if somehow they go missing or lose contact. Number 6, increase information on our Constitution, how the law works and what your rights are. I love our Constitution. And I understand Brian having a Fifth Amendment right angers people. And yes, it even angered me. Sometimes I wish we could just kind of take a right away from one individual. But no, because I love our Constitution. And if you or I needed it for some reason, meaning the Fifth Amendment, and we were not guilty of something, we'll be very thankful that we have that Fifth Amendment. Number 7, her family is already starting a site that will be a foundation in her name. And they said that it's going to be to help other families so they don't need to look for their loved ones on their own. And so I think we can expect them to use their grief to help others, which makes me so happy to see. And families of victims should band together and help other people who will go through this at some time. Think about Amber Alert and how that got started and how many people have been helped since that was created. Number 8, there may be more educating of law enforcement on domestic incidences. For all we know, this might turn into an entirely different protocol for law enforcement. I can go on, but you get the point here. We want to complain and say the story got so big, but look at all the good that's come from the story going so big. It's actually going to help other people. It's actually going to help other people, but yet we want to complain. Why? Why do we want to complain? Even Dog, the bounty hunter, went to Brian Laundrie's house. But people were upset over that. It was definitely a mixed reaction. And just look at my TikTok post about Dog the bounty hunter. Look at the comments. Dog was accused of turning it into a circus, and he only did it for attention or clout. Well, I mean, does he really need attention and clout? I don't know. I don't think he does. He's had a great deal of that over the years. And it was already a circus. Just join any Gabby Petito group, my goodness. Or look at all these true crime channels that are covering every rumor and every sighting of Brian. Total circus. Oh my gosh. And at the end of the day, if you were mad he went there or you thought that he had ulterior motives, his presence, just his presence, helped shine a light on the case. And despite how widespread the story is or may seem, there are definitely people out there who may not know about it or did not know about it who now know about it because Dog went there. And to his credit, he didn't stop and take selfies with people outside. He didn't bring his own camera crew. He didn't do any interviews in front of the home. And he left rather quickly. So he was somewhat respectful, right? I mean, I know he was banging on their door, but it was still somewhat respectful. And he later did an interview away from the home in front of a helicopter. And he explained why. And I thought his explanation wasn't shabby. I mean, because he did too lose one of his daughters in a different way. Joe Petito said today at Gabby's memorial that there's more good in the world than there is bad. And it's so true. And people do have hearts and people do want to help. But it's impossible for us to follow and help every single case. And ultimately, no one can help in any way until we actually hear about the case to begin with. How do we get people to hear about a case? We share it. That's number one. No matter where we live, and if it's not near us, share it. It takes 3 seconds to do. And of course, share it, especially if it's in your area. You know, if it's in your area and they're doing search parties or organizing them, you know, offer to help. Offer to bring supplies. Offer to help them map out the route or to put flyers up, whatever. I only started this channel about a month ago, and I'm not sure why I didn't do it sooner, but one of my first videos was on 2 females, both young, both moms to several children, missing from 2 different states, in 2 different separate situations, but had a lot of similarities. And at the time I made that video, I had 10 subscribers, mostly who were my family. But I took that link and I looked up every single group I could find for their area and I shared it. It got 400 views. It doesn't seem like a lot, right? I mean, obviously it's not a lot. But that's not too bad for a channel that, you know, was a few days old at the time. And that's 400 more people who saw their faces and heard their names that didn't prior to my video. That being said, my missing type videos that I do get way less views than ones where it's a commentary type video like this, where I'm just talking to you about a case. They get a lot less clicks. Why? I mean, everybody's complaining that not every case gets all this attention. I'm sharing missing people with you and it's not getting as many views. The 2 women that are missing, Angelina Fela and Olivia Fowler, are not much older than Gabby at all. They're 26, both of them, and both beautifully stunning women. And one is a blonde, just like Gabby, and yet they don't have the attention, right? So here I am presenting you these 2 women to share, and so people need to seize that opportunity and share it. We're going to complain about it. Let's do something about it. And you don't know how many times that I go to do a missing person story and I start digging for information to do a video on it. And when I go digging, I'm really looking for information from the family. I'm looking on social media to find a family member, a friend, somebody who has a post or who can answer questions in the comments so that I can get more, because the more details, the more helpful it would be. And I won't find a single one. There's so many of them. I'm like, what am I going to do? Make a video and say 2 words? Just a person's name and say this person's missing? I mean, there's no information to share. I mean, I can't even finish it. And like I said, you know, social media could be awful, but it could also be good. Like helping find a young deceased girl and give her family some closure. And I want to cover more of these missing person cases that need more attention. It was one of my goals that I stated was my motive for this channel. But I can't do it alone. I need help. I need you to share. I need you to bring me any story you see because I may not have seen it. And I will do my best to get it out as fast as possible and share it on every platform I run. If we're going to spend our time on social media, if we're going to spend our time discussing a case, let's make it meaningful. So they're not like at the end of the day, we're not like, oh my gosh, I just spent 7 hours in a group arguing with somebody about their theory and I got nothing in my house done. My dishes are all dirty. And you know how many times I see posts like that in groups? Like, oh my God, I'm so addicted to this case. I haven't washed my dishes. I haven't fed my kids. I called in food for the last week. Yada, 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 yada. And in reality, what we really doing were you just talking with people about the case? There's nothing wrong with that. That's a hobby, right? But if it was like consuming your life that much, did you at least do something worthy during that time? I guess that's the way I see it. I just don't really care to use this channel to just every single video is just me talking to you like I'm talking to you in this video. I do want to help. And if I can't help the victim in any way, like getting their word out, getting their story out, adding a different perspective to a story, or throwing out other possibilities and views and what have you, then at least the story might have some type of dialogue that somebody can learn from. And in the end, it's still helping somebody, right? For example, in Gabby's case, a lot of people who didn't know abuse, obviously, said, well, if Gabby was scared and Gabby was really abused, she would have told the cops that during that stop, or she would have left him that night. And that's that lacks so much understanding of abuse. And then when you do understand abuse, you don't say things like that. You don't. And so now those people have learned. They've learned from that, from making that statement, and people saying to them, excuse me, and sharing their own personal stories. And now that person learned. Right? So, this has been an hour now. I have a few other videos I'm about to do for you, actually. I am bringing you, let me see real quickly here. I have a missing person. I have another missing person. And another missing person and her infant daughter. And I do have an update on the Murdaugh case for those that are following that. And I am going to be still doing an update on Gabby's case for today and some other little things that I wanted to discuss about it. And I still need to get to episode 5 of my Caitlin Connolly series. There's not enough time in a day, guys, because I do have my own personal life as well. So on that note, I'll see you next time.